Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. Here's today's episode.
All right. Well, we're back talking to Dan about his win at the World Championships of Warhammer, but also not necessarily talking about Warp Coven, because Warp Coven, we all know, is maybe a little on the strong side, right, Dan?
No, what are you talking about? I'm sure I would have won with any other team. Absolutely. For sure.
Yeah. Specifically, one of the highlights of the entire tournament was at the end of the tournament, I asked you what other team you were interested in playing, and you mentioned Imperial Navy Breachers was what you were going to take before they chopped off your 13th operative.
Yeah, so I had a few practice matches. I played my friend Atri, who I talked to on my YouTube channel recently. So I played Breachers a couple times, saw some success with them, but they're kind of super reliant on this strategy of like bunkering down on Volcus and waiting your opponent out. Quite contrary to what they did or were supposed to do in the last edition, I feel.
Yeah, a team that went from an ultra blitz, couple, like the first move of the game, you're sending out a Melta with basically guaranteed 4 hits or 2.5 hits, is almost always going to crack a Marine or anything else you send it to. With the 13 operatives on Volcus, you can play defensively and have people come into you so that you get your damage resistance. Is the damage resistance even relevant on a 7 wound model?
I mean, sometimes, but not against any threat you're not trying to plan around anyway, I feel.
So there's a lot of plans that go into playing Imperial Navy Breachers, and unfortunately, one of the funnier, sad storylines of the World Championships was that of the 2 Imperial Navy Breachers, between the narrative and the competitive tournament, I think they had exactly 0 wins.
He's a hero and I salute him. He's getting the team so many buffs like you don't even know. Warp Coven are going to get absolutely flattened by this balanced data slate in all likelihood. However, I think Breachers are gearing up for some hefty buffs potentially.
Yeah. Do you feel like they just need that 8th wound, or do you feel like there's other ways that they could balance the team that would still get them to be in an interesting spot that isn't related to just how they played before?
Yeah, so I think there's several things they should do to Breachers, to be honest. Firstly, I do think that a couple of extra rules to differentiate them as a faction would be cool. Especially, I think that they have a couple of things which are only ever relevant on Into the Dark. The hatchway override device equipment and the deckhand ploy. Both of these, I think, are just not a great way to design a team. I mean, they're cool, but I feel like they should have an open equivalent. So, deckhand should, if you're on open, make it so that you can, retain some extra dice as crits or something if you run through a door.
What does deckhand do on Into the Dark?
Yeah, deckhand, for any listeners who don't know, is the ability for you to open a hatch during a charge, which is a pretty big rule break when it comes to In the Dark. But maybe on open, it could be something like ignoring the accessible trait when you're doing door fights. Because getting an extra inch would matter quite a bit in some cases. So just having a little bit more room for one of their ploys to work generically could be cool. And maybe, ignoring accessible in general during deckhand might not be the worst case, because it's not like the team is busting down any walls at 12 operatives.
No, absolutely not. I think that's a change which would definitely help them. They're a very honest team in general, and I think that currently they've not actually got the crazy rules to sort of back it up and make that worthwhile.
Yeah, but speaking of teams with crazy rules, Warp Coven, just crazy rule on crazy rule, right?
Yeah, I wrote a little sort of list of the things I think need nerfing, because I think there's 8 or so things which feel especially egregious and unfair.
What's the top one?
I guess it kind of depends who you hear it from, but the most silly thing they can do is the fly counteract ruling that they did. So if you have immaterial flight and you counteract, they ruled that you can technically go up to 6 inches because you're not moving, you're being removed and set back up.
With a counteract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want that, right?
I think when we took a look at this, we might have gotten this one a little bit wrong as far as rulings go. It does work for Corsair Voidsguard and Mandrakes, and I think Vespid, but I believe immaterial flight is supposed to be during your activation. So I think we lumped a couple things together, or the judges lumped a couple things together at the World Championships. So that one might not actually matter quite as much, but that rule is a generic rule that does work for many other teams that have the new fly equivalent.
Yeah, which is probably not great for the health of the game. I'm sincerely hoping no home games have been ruined since by someone that saw it at the champs and thought, that's a good idea. Please don't do that, guys.
But I mean, there's a lot of other strong things about Warp Coven and things that they have that are unique compared to a lot of the other teams, right? So what is maybe one of the big things that when you started playing Warp Coven, you realize that other teams just don't have access to? Obviously, Fly is a very powerful rule, but a couple other teams have versions of Fly. What are kind of like the unique strengths of Warp Coven that you felt like helped push you over the edge, and maybe things that you missed from your favorite team, the Breachers?
Yeah, so I think Temporal Flux and the long range Seek Heavy. So as I mentioned, Breachers are very honest in the way that, if you get hit by one of their attacks, it's kind of your own fault for being within threat range of their few powerful models. And I think that the long range Seek Heavy is especially unfair with Devastating 1, and versus Horde teams, you can just score a kill from across the map. I hit Ratman's Melter and killed it turn 1, which it just felt a bit unfair. For
listeners who don't know, the Sorcerer of Warpfire can alight someone, which gives you Relentless, and you only need visibility. Pretty rude. And then you can also have the boon that gives you Dev 1 on top of your 1/1 Seek Mindburn. So 5 dice on 4s, 1/1, effectively 1/2, and you just look at your opponent. And it's lethal 5-up. So you look at your opponent, you give yourself Relentless against them, and you just hit them. And against most 8-wound models, they just die. Pretty rude.
Doesn't feel especially interactive, I have to say.
But definitely when you're interacting with something like the World Championships of Warhammer, where you're playing against the best players, having the ability to just delete a 7-wound, 8-wound model without really interacting, very powerful when you can make mistakes as you climb up the leaderboards of these larger events. And very unfair. All right, so Seek Heavy, pretty big. What are the other big ones?
Temporal Flux, that one to just zip back, up to 9 inches if you've got the 3-inch extra range. That's something Breachers don't have. You have to be so careful with Breachers about your threats because you only have 4 or 5 of them. And once they're gone, they're gone. So that's like a weakness of the team that Breachers have. But with Warp Coven, I found it especially easy to keep my Doombolt guy safe just by teleporting him back completely out of visibility, or if that wasn't possible, you can spend 1 for Capricious Plan and teleport them back on Conceal, which with the new rules, Vantage gives cover from the floor, and that just means that it's especially hard for them to actually get to a spot where they can attack you.
Yeah, it's particularly brutal combo because you have effectively 5 or 6 APL operatives rather than the standard 3 APL Marine with some boosts, because when you're temporal fluxing and you're rewinding back to your original position and you've done Master of the Immaterium, you effectively have a move and a dash So you move dash out, shoot someone, and then you move dash backwards to where you started. And then every once in a while, if you have priority or initiative, you can also flip yourself back to conceal and then take an actual dash after you land. So you can eventually move like 12 inches on the rewind and also 9 inches going forward. So you're almost moving the entire length of the board if you conceptualize how much you're actually moving. And you've done it while also slamming your opponent with a Doom Bolt, which in this edition is pretty dang powerful. You know, better than a crack grenade in terms of actual damage. And with Lethal 5 often just taking, 4 to 6 off the top. And you did particularly well in some of the games when I walked by the games. You were landing hit crits pretty regularly with your Doom Bolt, which has got to feel pretty good when you're on these tight situations and you're trying to you're worried about where you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, Fate itself definitely helps in that regard. And I think the ceaseless rerolls, Warp Coven used to not have really any rerolls, and that is something that has made their shooting so powerful. Like in my match against John Rees, we saw Doom Bolt one hit kill his melter, which I feel they've gone to lengths to make sure doesn't really happen against Marines. So, yeah, it's easy to score a volume of crits with such a powerful weapon for this team.
Yeah, it's like Doom Bolt is the new plasma, essentially.
Yeah, Lethal 5 does a lot to cover up some of the deficiencies of not having the armor piercing, because it requires your opponent to land harder to land hits. And it's not like there's a lot of Lethal 5-up defense floating around. I think Angels of Death might be one of the few teams that gets you 5-up defense saves.
Yeah, the Doom Bolt can also be augmented as well. You can give it splash with the Devastating Wounds boon, or you can give it piercing crits. So versus my Plague Marine opponent, Matt Opperman, I ran Temporal Flight on the Destiny Sorcerer, but then I ran piercing crits on the Temperion Sorcerer so that I could borrow Doom Bolt from the other guy with Psychic Cabal, and then Doom Bolt with piercing crits, which may well be the best weapon in the game, honestly.
That's great to hear. I was always wondering if people were going to take their boons with the intent of borrowing weapons to basically grab stuff back and forth. So hearing you actively decide to do that against Plague Marines, oof, must have been really rough when Matt realized that he was like, oh no, I'm about to get slammed by Lethal 5 piercing crits, Doom Bolt.
Yeah, the boon choices are a bit puzzling. Ignore Obscuring is one which often you do put on the Warp Fire guy, but also the ability to borrow one with a scroll. Like, you can not take that one on any of your sorcerers, and then they still have to live in fear of obscuring shots while you still have the scroll, because, against my Phobos opponent, in a prior tournament, not at Worlds, he was deathly afraid of the Doom Bolt, as he should be, and knew that even smokes wouldn't protect him, because he could put down the smoke, I'd do the Ignore Obscuring boon, and then shoot him normally, and it might well kill a full health Phobos.
Extremely brutal. The Sorcerer Scrolls, I heard a lot of players saying, I'm going to use my once a game Sorcerer Scroll to do this thing, and then afterwards there's obviously a lot of emotional and metaphysical pressure lifted off of the game when you know that your opponent now has to play with whatever it is. But that turn when you activate it, generally pretty powerful. Did you find yourself activating it on a specific turn for specific boon, or did you feel like throughout the course of the tournament you were able to pick and choose and use all 9 of the boons at will?
I did have an opportunity for each one of them. Sometimes it was Time Walker. That extra inch is just so valuable if a play is super crucial. Versus my Corsair's opponent, I did that to score a double kill on his Shade Runner and his Felarch, which I think sealed the game at that point. I did it in the finals even, because I think that the Temporal Flux landing on my Doom Bolt Sorcerer was so impactful. And also I did the extra melee damage one. I had an opportunity for that against Jimmy Kelly because it made a difference to damage breakpoints. So the fact that each one of them has a time and a place, there's 9 boons, something like that. And it's just like having an extra like 6 firefight ploys that you have access to throughout the game, which is so strong.
For free.
Yeah, basically.
So, what is Warp Coven's scariest matchup?
That's a tough one. I wasn't looking forward to facing Hyrotech Circle against Shane. That for sure would have been a difficult one. A lot of people say it's Legionaries, and after playing some of the opponents in that tournament, I can definitely see why. I have a lot of difficulty into Inquisition. I've never played against Sisters of Silence, but I have heard some people say they think that's a matchup which is pretty terrifying. And the fact that they can switch off your ploys as well, you have to be super careful. Like, if you play Capricious Plan, that they don't just switch it off and leave you out in the open on engage.
Yeah, that was one of the big storylines of the tournament is, as we were going in, as we talked with a lot of players going into Worlds, there was always a discussion about whether or not you play the good thing, Warp Coven, Legionary, obviously very powerful. Or if you play the team that everyone thought, the old edition, you could play Horde teams, you would fight elites, and you would get a couple advantages, and you would build out, activate them, and you would find a way to like wiggle in and kill enough models. So obviously a lot of players took Inquisition agents. Australia, I think every player took either Warp Coven or Inquisition agents. And a lot of players took Inquisition agents, one of the most popular teams outside of the two big Space Marine threats. And turns out, at the highest level, having room for mistakes is probably better than having a cute, cheeky plan that removes your opponent's best plays. And obviously in the Warp Coven case, sometimes you have a little bit of both, where you just get all these extra dashes. You've got Seek Heavy, which is obviously very powerful, backed up by Relentless. Do you feel like the Inquisition agent matchups that you managed to play, or did you play that many of them overall at the World Championships?
I played 2. I played versus Augustin, the French guy that won London Grand Tournament, and I played Alexa, the previous world champion.
Okay. So 2 players of pretty high pedigree as far as actual competition goes.
You could definitely say that, yeah.
How did you feel like those matchups went? Did either of them bring the Sisters of Silence? Did the absolute authority of the Imperium stop Fate itself as my weapon at the crucial time? Or were you able to just play a cagier elites plan that didn't run into those pitfalls and then just snipe them out as you went up?
So they both sort of tried to play some mind games with the Sisters of Silence. So they both told me that they were bringing them and sort of had them on the table during operative selection. And Alexa even sent me a photo on Discord prior to the tournament with the caption, "I'm just going to leave these here," to me. So they lived in my head rent-free before the tournament. That was definitely something that had me panicking. But the ruling that a sister being nearby wouldn't prevent temporal flux from rubber banding you back to your original spot, I think probably does shift the reason why you might want to take it, because they ruled it was not a psychic additional rule.
Okay, so there was a couple specific, like World Championship specific rulings, which may or may not end up as FAQs. So I think while we were there, players were told, these are things that we're doing here just to get rid of some rules questions ahead of times and to standardize things. Obviously, one of them is how powerful the Sisters of Silence could be if they could stop rubber banding or some of these other psychic actions. And it turns out at Worlds, they were not allowed to. So neither Augustin or Alexa tried to use the Sisters of Silence. They both ended up taking, I assume, Kasrkin.
Yep, Kasrkin is the flavor of the edition now, I guess. Neither one of them took the Mind Layer, which is interesting. I do really like the Mind Layer when I played as Kasrkin. I think he can be so disruptive to elite teams. Although I did win both of the matches, so maybe Sisters would have been good. Although maybe I would have won by more. Who knows? It would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, that is disappointing to hear that neither of them stuck to their guns and tried to send 5 power swords in to see what happens. Because I do think it would be kind of interesting. The idea is that they are good enough where they should pivot a matchup, and so they exist, and psychic players should be afraid. But neither of them wanted to do it. How did those games end up working out? Did absolute authority and the ability for the Inquisition agents to counterspell really change how you approach those games? Or did you approach them much the same as any other Horde matchup?
You just need to be very, very aware of it. So you need to be aware of the threat range, which generally Inquisition are very honest, but actually, with the addition of the Kassakin Recon Trooper dash, which I'm actually against, I don't think that's something they should have access to. I think that's part of Kassakin faction identity. Between that, the Super Comms, which gives out 2 dashes, and the 4 inches indirect or sort of pseudo seek, I think those are really, really strong for threat range, because they can dash and then move and then dash again and then shoot you within 4 inches.
So how did you position around those things? Or did you send Zangors into slightly riskier positions? I think I might have heard at the tournament that you basically took the same layout of Sorcerers to Rubrics to Zangors the entire tournament. So there was no real change of plan against those two teams?
No, I didn't have a massive amount of time to practice. So I thought if anywhere is not the time to try something new, it's during an undefeated run at Worlds. I think I had the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm going to run this until it doesn't work out for me, and then I'll start trying something different. It did work out for me. So I took Razor Wire in the cases I was really worried about multiple threats, and then stuck the champion exposed on one side, protected by the banner. And he is such a tanky operative. 10 wounds with damage reduction to a minimum of 2. Tough nut to crack. That just then is not worth their threats running up and attacking him.
Very cute. So you actually did have a plan for your 314. From what I remember, 314.
Yeah. So I was considering it, and I think in the event that I did match up into Shane's Higher Tech, I would have ran 306, because I think Necrons are a team that can shoot through rubrics. I think that the Zangor melee would have challenged him, and I think the activation advantage would have been really handy.
Nice. I'm disappointed that, we weren't able to see some of the more interesting matchups. Legionary versus Warp Coven, obviously the highlight of the edition right now, because both teams are so very powerful. Did you have any big surprises against the Legionary players that you weren't expecting, or things that seemed like a particularly tough nut to crack that you were not aware of coming into the tournament?
So Escu managed to get onto my home objective. I wasn't aware that you could position your model half on and half off the fire steps. But generally, Legionary are actually quite an honest team, unlike Warp Coven, who play the game trying to outmaneuver your opponent. Legionary, generally, I think it's just about how well you can get close without taking too much damage, and then bashing them in with 4 buffs.
That's true. I mean, once you're in there with all the Chaos Gods coursing through your veins, you're picking between what you want to do, and you just mush people into little pieces, while Zinch is out there saying, this is my plan. On one part of this game, I will roll a 6. And it's just like, different plans for different folks. When it comes down to it, though, Escu, that was one of the highlights, I think, of your match against Escu, is the diagonal placement of a model. So how did you feel when that happened and then it got ruled in his favor at Worlds?
Well, I wasn't overjoyed, My plan was definitely contingent on forcing him to sort of throw his models forwards to get the points he needed to get. Given how hard he was working for the crit op, I really was considering it was his primary. So that was a turning point of the game. I think at that point, he could afford to play the point side of the game. But until then, I think I was definitely winning by sort of killing more of his models before actually giving him a shot.
Yeah, and for any listeners who are confused at this conversation, in the finals of the World Championships of Warhammer, it was ruled that on the fire steps of Vulcus, you can stand on any parts of the fire steps and be diagonal, because the ruling is you can be placed there, you're not overhanging, you're not falling off, and the pieces of terrain are both insignificant and exposed and vantage. So the whole thing is vantage, which means you can stand on any part of it, which I think is not an intuitive reading by any local scenes or probably most TOs, but that was how it was ruled.
It definitely surprised me. in retrospect, I think just leaving the Zangor icon bearer on that point would have done me well instead. Or sort of doing something to block his movement from getting there would have worked well.
Yeah. It seems like a pretty interesting matchup between the two pairs of teams. He didn't do any big surprises like taking a Khorne or taking a couple warriors to like push up and switch marks. He played a pretty honest legionary game that picked most of his specialists, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. He picked 5 specialists, or 1 leader and 4 specialists, and a warrior for the versatility.
From what I remember, there were a couple of legionary players that were playing multiple warriors. I think Can You Roll Crit also picked more than 1 warrior, 2 or 3.
That sounds like he was doing 2 or 3 pretty often.
I saw him running 2, which is pretty cool, and I do have a great deal of respect for anyone that chooses to run for more flexibility than raw power. So I have heard that John is famous for this move where he switched the warrior from legionary to Tzeentch and then spend a command point for an extra APL, move, dash, and double shoot the pistol, which on a Tzeentch warrior can be severe, punishing, with Chaos Talisman as well.
Can also get rending.
Yeah, and rending from Tainted Bolt Pistol. So it's the case that the worst they can roll would be 2 crits.
The absolute floor. So yes, currently there is a combo with initiative tie. So if you're holding the initiative, you can have a Tzeentch warrior, and then give him a 4th APL. But because you pick the mark and you give the 4th APL at the same timing window, you do the mark switch after you get the 4th APL. You turn into Slanesh, and then you can like move dash, go doink someone, or you can be Tzeentch. Or you can start on Nurgle for the defense as you're coming in, switch to Tzeentch, move up, double shoot someone. And if you have rending on your shoot action for your bolt pistol and Tzeentch, you have punishing on your strat ploy. You effectively it doesn't matter what you roll because you'll have severe and punishing and rending. So you're guaranteed 2 crits as long as you roll 1 hit.
Because no, you don't even need with the Chaos Talismans, you don't even need the hit. You can change one to a hit, change that to a crit with severe, change another miss to a hit with punishing, and then change that extra hit to a crit with rending.
So like the floor is just an absurd number of damage. You could fail all 4. Chaos Talisman, one of them, back into a success. And then that one turns into a crit, which punishing twice into 2 more successes. One of them will be rending, which is hilarious.
Yeah, that Tzeentch Melter as well is very scary because he's secretly a pistolier. Don't know if you guys knew this, but they gave the gunners for Legionaries bolt pistols, and now that they can, I guess they could always double shoot, but one of them has to be a bolt pistol, one of them can be a melter. With that extra APL ploy, the move, dash, and double shoot, given how deadly the bolt pistols for Legionary are now, and the melter, really great chance of killing elites, or a really solid chance to get a double kill even.
Yeah, as if we needed more reasons why the 2 powerful Chaos Astartes teams were powerful. Here we got our Melta Gunner able to cleanly double kill with guns. And one of them isn't even a melta gun when it fires.
Amusingly, even among Legionary, some of the most powerful stuff is Tzeentch.
Yeah, well, definitely a Tzeentch meta right now, whether you're playing as Legionary or as Warp Coven.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting note. Were there any playstyle differences that you perceive between Esku and Can You Roll a Crit? Because both of them are played Legionary and the upper brackets. They both have their own playstyles, and you played against both of them in pretty high-stress matches. Did you feel like there were any playstyle differences that you thought, Esku did this better, John did this better? I wonder what would have happened if they could have combined their 2 playstyles, or things that you worried about in different ways against either player?
So my match against Esku was much closer, and that's definitely something to note. But I have talked to Bart about this, who has played John a lot. So I had some advice about perhaps what he was going to try and do before the match, and he said that John is very reliant on his vast knowledge of the game and his sort of access to all these different techs that he knows, whereas I think Escu had this incredible game plan from start to finish. So I think Escu probably had a more solid game plan, but in terms of sort of an activation by activation basis, John maybe knew what sort of options were available to him.
Yeah, I think that could be a fair way to look at players who have broader information or like depth of play. So I'm just curious to see just, if you felt like there were substantial differences when you played them outside of, just what actually ended up happening. Because obviously, yes, it seemed like your game against Escu was much, much closer than John's. Because John, it seems like maybe some of the early kills snowballed pretty hard and then it all came down to it didn't matter that much later on, whereas those early kills impacted a lot of the future decision making. So Escu was able to drag out that decision-making process by playing a much cagier stage up. I know when I passed by, there was a smoke grenade that set 2 Legionary into the bubbles while they were also in conceal behind heavy cover. So even if you were able to strip obscurity, there was no way for you to actually get a shot that would really do all that much to them.
Yeah. So the smoke is an odd one, because if I'm within 2, am I not then ignoring obscurity, ignoring the smoke anyway? But I was thinking about it, and there was an opportunity for me to bring the blast sorcerer forwards and then borrow his blast spell. But if I were within 2, I'd be blasting myself because of the smoke. There would have been a case to get another angle and blast 2 legionaries if he didn't put the smoke down. So definitely a solid choice from him.
Yeah, there's definitely some playstyle things that are very important when it comes to picking teams and kill team. Obviously, you switch over to Warp Coven, and your other choice was going to be Imperial Navy Breachers. Do you feel like there's a conceptual through line between these two teams that make them teams that you've wanted to invest a lot of time and energy into? Because obviously, I think I've talked to you a couple times throughout the year, and you were on Breachers the last time we talked in a game against Ace, so it's become somewhat infamous on the internet. Obviously, that's not really what we're here to talk about, but there are playstyle things that draw you to these teams. What do you feel like you have a playstyle that gels well, particularly with these two teams, or is it just kind of like a vibes thing and you just like your dudes on the ship with axes and power fists?
I don't think these teams could be more different in terms of playstyle. I think that Warp Coven are one of the highest mental load teams in the game. Probably Inquisition are higher, but that's debatable. I found this last edition, they're such a pain to play as, just because of all the amount of things you need to remember and how important it is to try and keep the sorcerers safe, but also have them do a lot in a game. Breachers are a lot more honest, they're a lot more straightforward. It's I'm going to breach and clear and try and kill 2 people off the bat. But I think that generally they support my play style of playing the game on the models front. So I think Escu is an example of a player that plays it on the points front. He was someone who worked out exactly how to leverage the models so that he could get enough value crit up points wise from his legionaries, whereas I think Asier was the only legionary player I didn't table. I was killing a lot of operatives last edition, so when I heard about kill up, I thought, well, that's interesting, probably good news for me. And clearly, given how high scoring this tournament was, my play style to sort of flatten them on the model front and then grab the points has served me quite well.
Yeah, as far as talking about players that love killing everything, Jason has been out here trying to do all engage in cursors and intercession and legionary for the entirety of second edition kill team. So the kill op has been a big change, and making killing just as powerful of a strategy as scoring points or doing your secondary objectives has been a big change. So it is interesting to hear that you basically been smushing people and then dealing with the crit op and the attack ops on the back end.
Yeah, my winding it down a little bit is pretty similar, where I try to kill and preserve my own models as much and then grab the points on the back end. And I think for that reason, you had kind of said like Hyrotech Circle looked like a scary one, and I fully agree. Just like from that same mindset, like Hyrotech Circle is really, really tough. And maybe that one specifically requires a little more like trade models for points. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was discussing that matchup in particular with Bart, and I think the idea is just to sit back and play super cagey until turn 4, and that's the time when you run out and go completely ham because they're not reanimating anyone anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, the last game that my round 10 was against Hyrotech, and I just went screaming in round 1. I just like, it was into the dark. I popped all the doors, come sprinting down the middle, pop smoke on everyone. I've got like guard all over the place. And then it turns into the crazy situation of like, can you guard my guard? And like the guard versus counteract. And we went all the way like deep in the weeds on all that crazy stuff. And like we're trying to ignore obscuring, you're ignore obscuring, and track target your track target, and it was a crazy game.
Yeah, it seems that they have less reanimations now because it's only one a turn. But truth be told, they only had 2 ways to place the tokens down last turn with the ploy and the reanimator. It's now the case that they place them down every turn. They get 1 for free at the start, and their reanimator can do 1 or 2 if you counteract with him. I believe. I could be wrong about that, but
I think the reanimator bug is limited to once per turn. So even if you counteract, or you could command him, and then either way, it doesn't unlock another reanimation opportunity.
At any rate, it's still 2 a turn, so it's still the same as it was last edition. But they have access to like a lot more sort of tricks. I feel conceal guard from the death marks is huge.
Yeah, the other thing is now the internal balance of the Cryptex is much more powerful. So I think I saw all 3 Cryptex used throughout the entire weekend, whether it was the Psychomancer against a large chunk of matchups where the 8-inch bubble of no crits is very powerful. Not being able to retain crits definitely hurts a lot of teams, especially with the change of Plasma going to lethal 5-up. And then the Chronomancer being able to just yeet people into a new position that your opponent cannot expect, especially on a team with a lot of 5-inch movement, getting a 6-inch teleport. Very strong, and sometimes a teleport is, across the board. You summon an immortal, and now he's way far up because there's a combo where you can cortical something. So when you are pulling a model, you have infinite range as far as you can see them. So you could be like halfway up the board and suddenly reposition a warrior to a new spot, and that can be very powerful. And then the Technomancer just says delete anything when it fires your gun. So the internal balance is pretty good amongst the 3 of them. So it just means that all of their tricks are on play. Just depends on the match now.
I do really like that. That's something I think was a really big shame about the team last edition. And one of the coolest parts about Brood Brothers. I really love Queen Piece teams. So teams which have one really cool, scary operative. Quite cool to me. And I think that the Cryptech has absolutely nailed it because you tailor it to whichever matchup you want. And that then makes the team a lot more interesting. It gives it a lot more depth and gives it a lot more capacity to play well with the team, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Do you play a lot of chess? I know you call it a queen piece like game, or there are other games that you play that are similar to Kill Team that maybe you draw some lessons from time to time?
Yeah. Well, I play a lot of board games. I've played some chess. I'm not very good at it. That's more my brother's game. They play competitive chess, and I just sort of move the models around the board every once in a while. But for sure, I've played other games. There's an old Star Wars one, Imperial Assault, which had this great queen piece strategy where you'd bring Darth Vader and buff him up a lot, and then have officers and the Emperor to command him to do extra stuff throughout the turn.
Very cute. Looking at the reanimator sheet, it does look like you can maybe counteract and reanimate. It's just you would only get the 3-up chance to reanimate. There's nothing on this that says it can only be done once a turn, I think. So it might be that you could do it. You could maybe get 3 reses, but only when you're trapped in counteract. But I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and I don't think there's anything that says you can't counteract reanimate.
maybe it's in a clarification somewhere or something, but for sure that's going to be a pain to actually take them down, because if they have lost a lot of models, maybe they'll have less activations, and that's the time when they can start counteracting more. So there'll be more reanimation tokens down,
Yeah, I mean, one of the big updates is you always get your reanimation tokens now, which is definitely a huge update compared to the old edition. You're obviously rolling on a 3-up instead of a 2-up now, but you are generally getting up with a couple more wounds than the low point of last edition, and definitely not as much as the high point of last edition, but no one needs to go back to the glory days of 8 wound Necrons getting back up and then getting you down.
Yeah. For sure, they're a team I want to look at some point. I did play them in the last edition. I don't know if I want to keep being a meta chaser, but we'll have to see how it shakes out. I think the Nasty Little Hobbits' team could be quite fun. Or maybe the new teams I'm hearing some rumors about might be cool, but we'll see.
Yeah, so, throughout the course of the World Championships, there weren't any other teams as you played against them. You're like, oh, that seems like that would be fun, and maybe I'd want to try it.
I played Inquisition last edition when they first came out and realized they didn't suit me at all. They were so slow. I felt like the combos weren't fast enough for me because you need to set them up in advance, and I just didn't like the play style of making your opponent worse. It did not appeal to me. I want my opponent to be at their full strength during a match so we can really see the best of both sides. Corsairs do look really fun, and especially if I'm going for a pirate theme on my channel, I might have to wear a pirate hat, show up to a tournament, and play some Corsairs.
Yeah, and talking about showing up to tournaments in costume, at the finals of the World Championships of Warhammer, Dan was wearing, I think, an element of multiple other players on his top 8 run, and just random vibes from other players in his final game against SK. I remember looking at you as you were trying to move your models, shuffling, flags off of your body while your arms are moving just at the bare minimum, so you don't move anything. You're not having your flag touch any models, so that must have been pretty amusing. So definitely a Pirate Corsairs theme could be fun.
Well, it's like a Chaos Trophies thing of taking something from your fallen victims,
Yeah, instead of scalps, you were collecting clothing items.
Wow, and great clothing items they were. Ratman has a fantastic sense of style.
Which anyone can see in the World Champions of Warhammer blog, which we'll drop a link to in the page in the show description, just because it'll be fun. Obviously, you winning was a big part of your play skill, but obviously you were trained up by other players around you. A lot of times players say they get better when they play against better players. Do you have any big players in your area that you've learned a lot from, and what kind of lessons did you take from each player as you leveled up in the process? Because you're obviously on the very young side as far as kill team players go. So who have your kind of role models, tutors, coaches been on your way up?
So my dad got me into the game, and he's sort of been the person I practiced against the most. Definitely want to thank him, and by extension every member of the old ones, the team I'm in. They're all really fantastic players. Bart is sort of has this very precise gameplay, and I've learned a lot from that. That Dave Skinner guy kind of doesn't play the game anymore. Definitely not learning anything from him. But the other 4 guys, definitely I feel I'm learning a lot from them. And then oddly, I mentioned him during my World Championships match, but I've taught my friend David how to play the game. And I've been practicing against his legionaries. He's gotten really good, and he figured out a lot of the sort of tricks to do with them, which gave me the upper hand going into this tournament because I knew how to play against a strong legionaries player.
Nice. So a lot of basically once players are showing you different tricks and showing how to play precise, you get to learn and see those things and incorporate them into your own play style. Because playing precise is definitely a thing that is hard and is definitely a big level up moment for a casual player moving into the more competitive range. Did you feel like the World Championships of Warhammer was a more precise area or a less precise area than how you play at home?
Yeah, definitely more precise. I mean, it's by nature the most competitive event in the world, I think. The only one I would say has rivaled it is the World Team Championships in Belgium. But for sure, it really helps to measure out your opponent's threat ranges, and especially to agree with them. Okay, where exactly can you get? Am I within move dash shoot range of this guy? Am I within charge range of this guy? And if you can figure out where exactly you want to be, I mean, obviously that was a mistake in my last game, was not being out of that range with the melter. So I felt I could have really been punished for that. But really helped versus my Plague Marine opponent, because I could sort of go, where are your threat ranges? You've got absolutely no targets at the start of turn 2. And then I won the roll off, gave him initiative, collected my extra command point, and his first activation just wasn't very impactful.
And that way you could farm a couple extra CP, right?
Basically, yeah.
Did you find yourself edging towards giving your opponent the initiative whenever you had the chance, especially at the opening of turn 2?
Yeah, so Warp Coven can play this very sort of cagey game. As I mentioned, putting the Zangor so that that's the only operative they can attack, and then taking Razor Wire on the other side means that it's too far for them to get anywhere. The Zangor champion is a target you're very happy for them to attack. And versus elites, you have the activation advantage with 7 Zangors. So having the last couple of moves be something they can't retaliate to properly. Obviously, it's a lot easier with counteract, but still, it's one that they struggle against. Is so powerful, I think.
Yeah, having the threat ranges all mathed out ahead of time is definitely something that the World Championships allows much more than your average game at the local club, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think Spain and England do a very good job of this play by intent style, where you sort of agree with it on your opponent. Where exactly do I need to be for this? Because at the end of the day, as we saw during my match, players are going to knock terrain over. Models are going to move outside of their activations just because, we're clumsy people. And I think it's important that doesn't sway the outcome of the game, because it should be more about like your planning rather than having non-shaky hands or whatever.
Yeah, from everything that I saw with like the communication play by intent, the way that I saw like the Spanish and the English players doing it was just like absolutely amazing. It was just like the healthiest way to play the game, and it was just like it made the game even more fun that everyone can. It's like we know what I'm trying to do here, and then we just like agree on something, and like it was such a big awesome thing to witness, and I'm hoping that spreads to more regions.
It's a faster way to play the game as well. It's tedious for absolutely every move to have to be in the very exact spot you want it, and sometimes it's just not practical to position them all by millimeters, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm obviously on the side of sometimes you got to be precise and sometimes you don't. So knowing when, I think the most important thing as you get better is knowing when to have the high fidelity movement versus the low fidelity movement. Like moving up against the wall in Volcus, there's no reason to spend more than, I'm just going to shove up against the wall and be as tight as I can. If you're going to be moving 8.5 inches to get against the wall, maybe you probably do want to make sure that you can actually get to the exact spot you want to get to, especially when you have things like 40 millimeter bases. When it comes to cryptex for higher tech circle, there are sometimes places where on a 6-inch move you think you can get there, but if you actually measure it out, you might not be able to get as far as you can, because 40 millimeter bases are definitely a kind of a struggle to get around, because you need to be exactly 25 millimeters in from the edge of your base, and if you aren't, you actually cannot get around terrain as efficiently. So there are times when I think it's important and sometimes where I think it's not. You just have to know when to do it, which is not always intuitively the easiest thing. And obviously, on 32 millimeter bases, it generally doesn't matter too much, although it might have come up in your game against it could have come up basically in a couple spots. 32 millimeter bases on Volcus when you're trying to climb up onto terrain. If you're fully 32 millimeters underneath the base, you technically can't get around to the top of advantage without first coming all the way out, which requires 2 inches of movement. It'd be a little rough. And I'm sure, like, you know, at the World Championships, those moments where people run into those sticky moments can be a little spicy just because people expect a certain way of playing and sometimes reality does not agree with them.
For sure, some of the changes to the edition, the ability to string a move and a dash together from the last edition, was sort of a jarring change to me, even because in my championships match, I wanted to be able to get the rubric on top of the ruins, and I don't think that was actually very possible at all.
Yeah, on Volcus, you know, a lot of the walls are actually a little over 4 inches tall, which means that unless you have a ladder and you're going over a large ruin with the ladder, you actually can't do it on a 5-inch movement. It's just physically impossible because you move up 4.5, which requires 5 inches, and then you need at least 2 inches to go over because your base is 32 millimeters. So you actually need 7 inches of movement, or you need a ladder, or you have to go around the other side.
Even though it shows how important ladders are, really.
Yeah, ladders are very important, and it shows that the book, inside of the book for the core rulebook, this is part of the reason why I think it came up with the UK players, is that the book shows a 4-inch climb over the wall, but in reality, it is 4.5, 4.25 inches, which means that it takes 5.
Yeah. For sure, movement is tighter than ever, with accessible traits being added to the hatchways on Into Dark and the doors on Open. A lot of teams are slower than they used to be, and I think it's really more about getting every inch out of the move that you can.
Yeah, there's a little less slop now that you cannot add in a move and a dash, because now you do need to end both of those options in legal positions. So there's going to be a couple places where you can actually get yourself into interesting positions, because it came up where someone was trying to take a move, plant a beacon, and then dash, but then his component contested whether or not along the path of that move dash that he could actually drop a beacon 6 inches away from his older beacon.
I'm actually curious about that versus Escu, because I don't know if it was considered if the dash could be finished within within a legal position, because obviously the Anointed was removed for the steppers to go in there instead, and I'm not 100% if he could have been finished that dash in a legal location. Obviously the match is done, it's way in the past. I didn't catch it, Dio didn't catch it. Probably he could have, but that's something I didn't even consider. So on that front, I probably should have been more careful about it, to be honest.
Yeah, being able to be more careful or less careful at will when it's important, super important in sweaty games of Kill Team. Are there any local London tournaments that you want to give a shout out to in the near future, or are you focused on getting back to school and dealing with uni?
Well, I played one in preparation for the Worlds, and I've got one up north in the UK coming up in December, but for sure I've missed 8 lectures to go to this event, and yeah, it's going to be a tough one. I do also need to get out content for my channel now. I think trying to ride the high of winning this thing would be great for my analytics and such. So for sure,
we'll make sure to shout out your channel on our show notes. Do you want to give a little description of what you're trying to talk about on your channel before we split for the day?
Okay, it's called Captain KT. I just want to go over sort of anything I want to talk about. I've done a lot of battle reports recently or tournament reports, because I've felt the need to run over what happened during them. But I want to talk to Ace and George Armour, as I mentioned, do some more about strategy, and sort of some more advice to people would be good.
yeah, there's lots of different ways to go about giving advice to players, lots of different things that you have as your perspective, being a Navy Breachers player, WTC player, World Championship of Warhammer winner. And I assume you've done well at Warhammer World too. Not that I've ever really kept track of your climb specifically.
I think I came second at Warhammer World, but I don't think I've ever won an event there.
I guess that's one final fun note. How do you feel like the differences between Warhammer World versus World Championships of Warhammer?
The TOs at World Championships were impeccable. I mean, obviously you did a great job. I trusted Layla's rulings all the time, even when they were against me. And Ben did a good job. I just think that at Warhammer World, it is tough for the judges to try and know multiple game systems, but to have those people that can focus on kill team and make really decisive and solid rulings is a great one. I'm a big fan of that difference for sure.
All right. Well, if there's any other final shout outs for club or local shop or anything before we split, Dan, otherwise, it's been really great having you on talking about Warp Coven and their dominance, some of their tricky combos with Sorcerer's Scrolls and Relentless Mind Burns, which obviously very powerful, and, a little bit on the silly Imperial Navy Breachers. If there are any final shout outs.
Yeah, I'd just like to say the old ones as a team, we finished last at ITC. Top of the ITC last season. So, and we got three of us through to the top 16, and 5 of us through to the championships. We got best overall, we got best general. So I think as a team, I'm very excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and thank you, listeners, for listening until the end.